The sterile chill of the funeral home did little to numb the ache in my chest. It was a dull, persistent throb, a constant reminder of Eleanor's absence. Outside, a late autumn rain slicked the streets of Oak Creek, mirroring the somber mood that had settled over us like a shroud. I stood by the polished mahogany casket, my hand hovering over the cool, smooth wood, fighting the urge to trace the grain, to find some tactile connection to the woman who had been my world for 42 years. My son David, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a kind of impatient displeasure, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, radiating an aura of barely suppressed annoyance. He hadn't looked at me directly since we'd arrived. Not really. His gaze kept flicking towards the small crowd of mourners, mostly Eleanor's friends, a few distant relatives, and a handful of colleagues from her beloved library. He should be more upset. I'd overheard one of Eleanor's sisters whisper to my sister-in-law earlier that morning, her voice laced with that particular brand of pity that always felt more like judgment. He looked so composed. Composed, if only they knew. Inside I was a roiling sea of grief, waves of sorrow crashing against the rocky shores of my resolve. But Eleanor had always taught me to face life's storms with a steady hand and a calm demeanor. It was one of the many things I loved about her, and it was something I owed it to her to embody, even now, in the face of this profound loss. The Reverend, a kind man named Father Michael, who had known Eleanor through the church book club, approached me. His presence was a gentle comfort. "Arthur," he said softly, placing a hand on my arm. "Are you holding up all right?" I managed a weak smile. "As well as can be expected, Father." "Eleanor was a remarkable woman," he continued, his eyes reflecting genuine sadness. "She touched so many lives. This turnout is a testament to that." I nodded, my throat tight. She was. She truly was. David cleared his throat, a sharp, grating sound that cut through the hushed reverence. "Dad, people are arriving. Maybe you should greet them. You know, play the grieving husband." The words, so callous, so devoid of empathy, landed like a physical blow. I turned to face him, my eyes narrowing. David, at 35, had always been a challenge. Bright, ambitious, but possessed of a certain emotional detachment that Eleanor and I had often discussed with a mixture of concern and resignation. He had inherited his mother's sharp intellect, but he seemed to have inherited his grandfather's, my father's, cold pragmatism. "David," I said, my voice low but firm, "this is my wife's funeral. I will grieve as I see fit." He scoffed, a humorless sound. "Right, because you were always so involved. She did everything, didn't she? Organized everything, planned everything, was everything." He gestured vaguely around the room. "This whole thing, I assume you had no idea about any of it." His insinuation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was true that Eleanor had always been the planner, the organizer, the one who meticulously managed their shared life. But to suggest I hadn't been involved, hadn't cared, was a betrayal of our shared history, a history he clearly knew little about. "That's not fair, David," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Isn't it?" he challenged, his eyes meeting mine with a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher, anger, resentment, or perhaps something even darker. "You always let her do it all, and now she's gone, and you're just here, standing around. What exactly are you needed for now?" The question, innocent in its brutality, struck me with the force of a revelation. Needed? For what? To stand by her side, to hold her hand, to cherish her. Yes, I had been needed for all of that. And more. A wave of something akin to defiance washed over me, pushing back the tide of grief. Eleanor, in her infinite wisdom, had foreseen this. She had prepared for it. "You know, David," I said, my voice steadying, the dull ache in my chest momentarily overshadowed by a surge of something else. Pride, perhaps, or a quiet vindication. "You might be surprised by what you don't know." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity finally breaking through his practiced indifference. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" I looked back at the casket, at the woman I had loved, and a sense of profound peace settled over me. "That your mother," I began, my voice resonating with a quiet authority, "made sure I was needed. Very much so." The rain outside intensified, drumming a steady rhythm against the chapel windows, as if in anticipation of the storm that was about to break within these walls. I met David's gaze again, a silent promise passing between us, a promise of truths yet to be revealed. The 15,000 words of our story, it seemed, were just beginning to unfold. The hushed murmurs in the room intensified, a ripple of curiosity spreading amongst the attendees. David's expression shifted from disdain to a bewildered frown. He clearly hadn't expected that response, hadn't anticipated anything beyond my meek acceptance of his implied criticism. "What are you talking about, Dad?" he pressed, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. He glanced around, noticing the sudden attention. Mum wouldn't have kept secrets. I allowed a small knowing smile to play on my lips. Secrets, David? No. Eleanor didn't deal in secrets. She dealt in clarity, in planning, in ensuring that those she loved were taken care of, in every conceivable way. I took a deep breath, the scent of lilies and damp earth filling my lungs. It was time. Time to pull back the curtain, not out of spite, but out of a deep, abiding love for Eleanor, and a quiet determination to finally assert my place, not just as her husband, but as the steward of her legacy. "You always saw Eleanor as the architect of our lives, didn't you?" I continued, my gaze sweeping over David, then back to the casket. "And you weren't entirely wrong. She had a vision, a profound understanding of how things should be. But you assumed she designed it all for herself, or perhaps for you. You underestimated her foresight. You underestimated her love for me." Father Michael watched us, his expression a mixture of professional reserve and gentle concern. He'd known Eleanor for years, had witnessed her quiet strength and unwavering faith. He understood, perhaps better than David, that there was more to this story. David shifted his weight, his impatience returning. "Dad, this isn't the time for riddles. If you have something to say, just say it." "And I will," I assured him. "But first, let me tell you about the woman your mother truly was. She wasn't just the woman who managed the household accounts, or who remembered everyone's birthdays, or who volunteered at the library every Tuesday. She was a woman of immense intellect, of sharp business acumen, and of an unshakable belief in preparedness." I paused, gathering my thoughts, allowing the weight of my words to settle. "When we first married Arthur and Eleanor Davies, we were young, full of dreams, and frankly, a little naive about the realities of life. Eleanor, however, always had a practical streak. While I was dreaming of my next scientific discovery, and bless my heart, I did love my work, Eleanor was building our foundation, brick by careful brick. I remembered those early years. We'd lived in a modest apartment in Chicago, both working tirelessly. I, a junior researcher at a local university, passionate about astrophysics but earning next to nothing. Eleanor, a bright and ambitious young woman who, despite her own burgeoning career as a librarian, had taken it upon herself to manage our finances with an almost militant discipline. "She started investing," I explained, my voice growing stronger. "Small amounts at first, wisely. She read financial journals like I read astronomical charts. She understood risk. She understood growth. She saw opportunities that I, lost in the stars, completely missed." David frowned. "Investing? Mum? I thought she just saved." "She did save, David, but she also made our savings work. She believed in building security, not just for herself, but for us, for our future, for your future." I looked at him directly. "And she never stopped. Even after you were born, even when her career took off, she continued to manage our assets. She was meticulous. She had a portfolio that would make a seasoned Wall Street broker envious." The concept seemed alien to David, who saw his mother solely through the lens of her nurturing domestic role. His world revolved around his own burgeoning tech startup, a realm of rapid growth and high stakes, but it was a world he believed he navigated entirely on his own. "But why wouldn't she tell me?" he asked, a genuine bewilderment creeping into his tone. "Why wouldn't she tell us?" "Because she trusted me," I said, the words simple, direct, and imbued with a lifetime of shared intimacy. "She trusted my judgment, and she knew that one day I would need to step up. She knew that my role wasn't just to be the dreamer, but also the protector, the one who would carry on." I took another step towards the casket, my hand finally resting on the cool, polished surface. "And she prepared me for that, meticulously. For years, she'd been showing me the ropes, explaining her strategies, bringing me into the fold, not to usurp her role, but to understand it, to be ready." The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and a sliver of weak sunlight managed to pierce the clouds, casting an ethereal glow on the scene. It felt like a sign, a moment of quiet illumination. "So when you say I'm not needed, David," I said, my voice resonating with a quiet strength that surprised even myself, "you're mistaken. Your mother made sure I was not only needed, but equipped. She left me the means, the knowledge, and the responsibility to ensure our family's continued well-being. She left everything to me." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the hallway. David's mouth was slightly ajar, his eyes wide with a dawning, reluctant understanding. The carefully constructed image he held of his parents, of his mother, of me, was beginning to crumble. And in its place, something far more complex, far more real, was starting to emerge. The echo of Eleanor's voice, a voice of wisdom and foresight, was finally being heard. The pronouncement hung in the air, a stark contrast to the somber melody of the funeral dirge playing softly from hidden speakers. David's initial shock began to morph into something else, a flicker of suspicion, perhaps, or the dawning realization that his perception of his father and of his mother's wishes had been fundamentally flawed. He stared at me, his brow furrowed, searching my face for any sign of jest or exaggeration. There was none. "Everything," he finally managed, the word a soft exhalation, barely audible above the gentle rain. "What do you mean, everything?" I met his gaze, my expression calm, resolute. "I mean exactly that, David. The house, the investments, the savings, well, everything we built together." The slight tremor in my voice was not one of uncertainty, but of the profound weight of that inheritance. It wasn't just about financial assets. It was about the trust Eleanor had placed in me, the responsibility she had entrusted me with. It was about continuing our life's work, together, even in her absence. David scoffed, a weak, disbelieving sound. That's impossible. Mum would have never. She always talked about leaving things to us, to me, and Sarah. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, David's wife, was a pragmatic woman, a lawyer who understood the value of clear directives and legal pronouncements. She'd always been the more reasonable one in their household, a buffer against David's more impulsive tendencies. "She did leave things to you both," I clarified, choosing my words carefully. "But the core of our estate, the foundation upon which everything else was built that she entrusted to me. She wanted to ensure that the decisions made would be guided by a clear, unified vision, and she believed that vision was best carried out by me." This was the part that Eleanor and I had discussed countless times in the quiet evenings after David had gone to bed, or during our long walks in the park. She knew David's tendency to be easily swayed, to make rash decisions. She worried about him squandering what they had worked so hard to build. "She wanted a steady hand at the helm, David," I explained, my voice softening. "A hand that wouldn't be easily swayed by market fluctuations or impulsive ventures. She knew my temperament, my patience, my long-term perspective. She believed I would honor our shared values and ensure our family's security for generations to come." The attendees nearest us had fallen silent, their conversations hushed, their attention now fully captured by the unfolding drama. Eleanor's sister, Martha, who had always viewed me with a degree of suspicion, her eyes now wide with something akin to awe, looked from David to me. David, however, seemed to be struggling to reconcile this new reality with his ingrained perception of me as a passive, perhaps even inept figure in Eleanor's life. His ambition, so evident in his professional life, seemed to clash with the idea that his own father possessed a quiet strength and foresight he had entirely overlooked. "But you never acted like you were in charge," he stammered, the words laced with frustration. "You always deferred to her, you let her handle all the important decisions." "That's because we were partners, David," I countered gently. "We discussed everything." Eleanor was brilliant at managing the day-to-day, at seeing the immediate needs and opportunities. My role was often to provide the long-term perspective, to ensure we weren't sacrificing future stability for short-term gains. We complemented each other, but the ultimate authority, the final say on our shared assets, she placed with me. It was her way of ensuring continuity, of safeguarding what we had built. I recalled the day Eleanor had finalized her will with her lawyer. I had been present, of course. We had gone over every clause together, her hand resting on mine, her eyes conveying a depth of love and trust that transcended words. She had looked at me then, her gaze steady, and said, "Arthur, you are my rock. You always have been, and I need you to continue to be that rock for our family." This is my way of making sure you have the tools to do so. She was sick for a long time, Dad, David said, his voice dropping, laced with a new, raw emotion. You knew she was sick. Why didn't you prepare me then? The question was a dagger, twisting in the wound of my own grief. The months leading up to Eleanor's passing had been a blur of hospital visits, hushed consultations, and the agonizing process of watching the woman I loved fade. David had been present in his own way. He'd visited, he'd offered logistical support, but he'd always seemed to maintain a certain distance, as if shielding himself from the full emotional impact. Because Eleanor wanted it this way, David, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. She believed that confronting the reality of her illness head-on while necessary didn't mean we had to abandon the process of securing our future. She wanted to leave this world knowing that our legacy was protected. And she wanted me to be the one to carry that torch, not out of ego, but out of love and duty. I stepped closer to David, my hand reaching out, not to touch him. I knew that would be unwelcome, but to gesture towards the casket. She entrusted me with her most precious gift, David. Not just her possessions, but her confidence, her faith in my ability to navigate the complexities of life, to make the right decisions, to ensure our family's continued prosperity. This isn't about power, David. It's about responsibility. It's about honoring her wishes. The rain had stopped. A hesitant sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the room. The atmosphere in the funeral home, once heavy with sorrow, now crackled with an unspoken tension, a prelude to a reckoning. David looked at me, then at the casket, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The weight of inheritance, I realized, was not just financial. It was emotional, and for David, it was the weight of a truth he had never anticipated. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the soft click of Martha's knitting needles. David's gaze remained fixed on me, a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, uncomfortable curiosity warring in his eyes. He was clearly struggling to reconcile the image of his stoic, somewhat detached father with the man I was now revealing, the steward of his mother's considerable financial legacy. "Darcy, I don't understand," David finally said, his voice strained. "Mom always made it seem like everything was shared, equal." "And it was in spirit, David," I replied, my voice calm and measured. "Eleanor believed in partnership, in shared lives, but she also believed in ensuring stability and continuity. She was pragmatic. She knew that unforeseen circumstances could arise, and she wanted a clear plan in place." I took a deep breath, the scent of funeral flowers and stale air filling my lungs. She didn't want there to be any ambiguity, any room for dispute or mismanagement after she was gone. She meticulously planned her estate, and in doing so, she made specific provisions that reflected her confidence in my ability to manage our assets responsibly. Martha paused her knitting, her needles hovering in mid-air. Her eyes, usually sharp and appraising, were now wide with a mixture of surprise and something that looked remarkably like respect. Eleanor had often confided in me about her sister's well-meaning but often meddling nature. Martha meant well, but she had a tendency to stir the pot, to insert herself into situations where she wasn't needed. "So," David said, his voice hardening slightly, "you're saying Mum's will leaves everything to you? The house? The investments? All of it?" "The primary assets, yes," I confirmed. "The bulk of our estate, but not exclusively. She made generous provisions for both you and Sarah, and for her mother, of course. I knew Eleanor's mother, my mother-in-law, a sweet but frail woman who lived in a comfortable assisted living facility, would be well taken care of. Eleanor's love for her was unwavering." "Generous provisions," David scoffed. "Like what? A token amount? A yearly allowance?" The bitterness in his tone was unmistakable. "Nothing of the sort, David," I said, my patience wearing thin. "She established trusts for both you and Sarah, ensuring your financial security and providing for future needs. But the ultimate control, the decision-making power regarding the core estate, she placed in my hands. She trusted me to make sound judgments, to protect our family's future, and to act in accordance with her values." I remembered Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a stern but fair man. He had explained the nuances of the will to me in painstaking detail after Eleanor's passing, making sure I understood the extent of my responsibilities. He'd even presented me with a detailed summary of Eleanor's investment strategies and her long-term financial projections. She didn't want her legacy to be subject to impulsive decisions or potential disagreements, I continued, my gaze fixed on David. She wanted a single point of responsibility, someone who understood the full scope of our financial life and who would act with prudence and foresight. That person, she decided, was me. The implication was clear. Eleanor didn't fully trust David, or perhaps Sarah, to manage such significant assets without guidance. It was a harsh truth, but one I felt compelled to articulate, not to shame them, but to explain the reality of Eleanor's final wishes. This is unbelievable, David muttered, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe Mom would do this, without telling us. She told me, David, I said softly, and she trusted me to tell you when the time was right. The time is now. This is not a punishment, nor is it a reward. It is simply the execution of Eleanor's carefully considered plan. I saw a flicker of panic in David's eyes. His own startup, while promising, was a high-risk venture. He had spoken of needing further investment, of expanding rapidly. The prospect of his father now controlling the purse strings, a father he'd always perceived as secondary, must have been daunting. So, he began, his voice tight, what happens now? Do you control everything? Do you decide what we get, when we get it? I manage the estate, David, I clarified. I make the decisions regarding investments, expenditures and distributions, always with the best interests of the family in mind, and in accordance with Eleanor's directives. But that doesn't mean I won't involve you. I value your input, your perspective, but the final decision rests with me. I knew this wouldn't be easy for David. He was accustomed to being in control, to charting his own course. This shift in authority, this revelation of his mother's deep-seated trust in me, would undoubtedly challenge his ego. We need to see the will, he declared, his voice firming with a renewed sense of purpose. We need to see the legal documents. I want to understand exactly what you're talking about. Of course, I agreed readily. Mr. Henderson has copies of everything. We can arrange a meeting at your convenience. You and Sarah can review the will, the trust documents, everything. You will see Eleanor's precise wishes laid out. Martha finally lowered her knitting, her expression unreadable. She had always been fiercely protective of Eleanor, and perhaps saw this as a vindication of Eleanor's shrewdness. Eleanor was always one step ahead, Martha murmured almost to herself, always planning. She was, I agreed, my gaze returning to the casket, and she wanted to ensure that her life's work, the security she built for our family, would continue to flourish. She entrusted that to me. The rain had completely stopped now. The clouds had parted, and a pale, watery sunlight streamed through the chapel windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like a new dawn, a new chapter beginning, not just for me, but for David and Sarah as well. The weight of inheritance was palpable, and its unveiling, I knew, would be the catalyst for a long and perhaps arduous journey of understanding and reconciliation. The days following the funeral were a strange mixture of quiet grief and simmering tension. The initial shock of the will's contents had subsided, replaced by a palpable unease that permeated our interactions. David and Sarah had agreed to meet with me and Mr. Henderson, Eleanor's longtime lawyer, a week after the funeral. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at his stately downtown office, a place that always exuded an air of quiet authority and unwavering discretion. I arrived early, needing a moment to steel myself. The weight of Eleanor's legacy felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just the financial responsibility, it was the emotional burden of navigating this new dynamic with my son and daughter-in-law. David, I suspected, was still wrestling with his wounded pride, his perception of me as a secondary player shattered by the reality of Eleanor's trust. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, would likely approach the situation with a more measured, legalistic mindset, seeking clarity and security for their future. Mr. Henderson greeted me with a warm handshake and a solemn nod. He was a man in his late 60s, with a sharp mind and a gentle demeanor, someone Eleanor had trusted implicitly. "Arthur," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional experience, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat. David and Sarah will be here shortly." We sat in his spacious office, mahogany furniture and leather-bound books, lending an atmosphere of gravitas. A faint scent of old paper and lemon polish hung in the air. On his desk, precisely arranged, were several manila folders, each bearing Eleanor's name. As if on cue, the door opened and David and Sarah entered. David looked determined, his jaw set. Sarah, on the other hand, appeared more composed, her expression neutral, observant. She offered me a polite, albeit cool smile. "Arthur," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, "thank you for meeting with us." "Please sit," Mr. Henderson invited, gesturing towards the chairs opposite his desk. Once everyone was settled, Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Arthur," he began, his tone professional yet empathetic, "I understand this is a difficult time for all of us. Eleanor was a dear friend and a valued client. Her passing has left a significant void." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. As Arthur has explained, Eleanor took great care in preparing her estate. She wanted to ensure that her wishes were carried out precisely and with clarity. Her will reflects a carefully considered plan designed to provide for her loved ones while safeguarding the assets she worked so hard to build. He picked up one of the folders. "This document," he said, holding it up, "is Eleanor's last will and testament. It was drafted and signed under her full capacity, with all legal requirements met. Arthur, as the executor and primary beneficiary, is tasked with its implementation." David shifted in his seat, his impatience evident. "Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, we'd like to see the specifics, the details of what Eleanor left to whom." "And you shall," Mr. Henderson assured him. He opened the folder, revealing a thick stack of legal documents. Eleanor established 2 primary trusts. The first, the Davies Family Trust, designates Arthur as the sole trustee and beneficiary during his lifetime. Upon Arthur's passing, the remaining assets of this trust will be distributed amongst David and Sarah, according to specific provisions outlined herein. He continued, his voice methodical. "This trust encompasses the majority of Eleanor's liquid assets, her investment portfolio, and the proceeds from the sale of any jointly held properties, excluding the primary residence." David's eyes widened slightly. "So the house—" "The primary residence, the home at 14 Oak Street," Mr. Henderson continued, "is designated to remain under Arthur's ownership and used during his lifetime. Upon Arthur's passing, it will then pass to David and Sarah jointly. This was a point Eleanor and I had discussed at length. She wanted me to have the comfort and security of our home, the place filled with our memories, for the remainder of my life. She knew how much it meant to me. Then there is the David and Sarah Legacy Trust," Mr. Henderson went on, opening a second folder. "This trust was funded during Eleanor's lifetime with a significant allocation of assets. It provides for immediate and ongoing financial support for both David and Sarah. It includes provisions for your education, your children's education should you have any, and significant lump sum distributions at specific milestones, upon reaching certain ages, or for the establishment of your own businesses, for example." He looked directly at David. "Eleanor was very proud of your entrepreneurial spirit, David. She believed in supporting your ventures, but she also wanted to ensure that you had a safety net and that the funds were utilized in a structured, sustainable manner. This trust provides that structure." David leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something akin to relief mixed with lingering skepticism on his face. It wasn't the outright control he might have expected, nor was it the dismissal he might have feared. "So, Dad," David said, turning to me, his tone less confrontational now, more searching, "Mom didn't disinherit us. She just put you in charge of the main pot." "She put me in charge of stewarding her legacy, David," I corrected gently. "She trusted me to manage our shared assets wisely, to ensure our family's long-term security. She knew I would honor our values and her intentions." Sarah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Arthur, Mr. Henderson, we appreciate the clarity. It's a lot to take in. Eleanor was always so thoughtful, so thorough." She offered me another small, more genuine smile. "We understand that she wanted the best for all of us." Mr. Henderson nodded. "Eleanor's primary concern was always the well-being and security of her family. Her will is a testament to that. It ensures that her legacy endures and that her loved ones are provided for, now and in the future." He then proceeded to go through the finer points of the trust documents, explaining the distribution schedules, the conditions for certain payouts, and the reporting requirements for the trustee. It was detailed, complex, and undeniably thorough, precisely the way Eleanor would have wanted it. As the meeting drew to a close, a fragile sense of understanding began to emerge. The initial shock and resentment seemed to be giving way to a more pragmatic acceptance. The weight of Eleanor's inheritance was still immense, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could learn to carry it together. The meeting with Mr. Henderson had been productive. That was the word I kept returning to. Productive, in that it had laid bare the facts, the legal framework of Eleanor's final wishes. Yet beneath the surface of legal jargon and financial terms, the emotional currents still ran deep. David and Sarah had left with copies of the documents, their expressions a complex tapestry of relief, lingering confusion, and perhaps a grudging respect. For my part, I felt a strange sense of quietude, the calm after a storm, but the underlying ache of Eleanor's absence remained. That weekend, the sun finally decided to make a more substantial appearance, painting the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air, crisp with the first true chill of late autumn, carried the scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke. It was the kind of day Eleanor had always loved, a day for walks, for reflection, for tending to her beloved garden. The garden, it was her sanctuary, a riot of colour and life that she had cultivated with immense passion and dedication over the 30 years we'd lived at 14 Oak Street. Roses bloomed defiantly against the encroaching cold. Late-season perennials held their heads high, and the sturdy oaks and maples surrounding the property stood sentinel, their leaves a breathtaking mosaic of crimson, gold, and russet. I found myself drawn to it, a magnetic pull towards the place that held so many of her memories. I walked through the familiar paths, my footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. Each plant, each flower bed, seemed to whisper her name. The sprawling hydrangea bushes, the neat rows of lavender, the climbing roses that twined around the pergola, they were all extensions of her spirit, living testaments to her love for beauty and order. As I reached the center of the garden, near the old stone bird bath, I noticed David and Sarah standing by the back patio, their figures silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. They weren't speaking, just looking out at the expanse of vibrant autumn colors. It seemed Eleanor's garden still held a powerful sway over them, even in her absence. I hesitated, unsure of how to bridge the distance that had settled between us. The will had changed things, not irrevocably, but enough to create a subtle shift in our dynamics. I was no longer just Dad. I was the executor, the trustee, the one holding the reins of the financial future they had perhaps always taken for granted. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards them. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" I offered, my voice a little rough. David turned, offering a curt nod. Sarah offered a more hesitant smile. "It is," she replied. "The garden? It looks magnificent, Arthur. As always." "Eleanor's touch is everywhere," I agreed, my gaze sweeping across the meticulously maintained flower beds. "She had such a gift, such patience." "She always said gardening was like life," David chimed in, a hint of his old self returning. "You plant the seeds, you tend to them. You deal with the pests and the weeds, and sometimes you get a beautiful bloom. Sometimes nothing comes of it, but you keep trying." It was a rare moment of shared reflection, a glimpse into the man Eleanor had raised. "She learned that from her grandmother, you know," I said, a nostalgic smile playing on my lips. Her grandmother had a small farm in Vermont, taught Eleanor the value of hard work and perseverance. "I didn't know that," Sarah murmured, looking genuinely interested. "There's a lot you don't know, David," I said, not unkindly. "A lot Eleanor and I shared that perhaps didn't always fit into the narrative you understood." David shifted uncomfortably. "I know we've been difficult, Dad, since the funeral, since we understood about the will. It's a significant change," I acknowledged, "and I understand it wasn't what you expected. But Eleanor's decisions were not made lightly. They were made out of love and a deep desire to ensure our family's long-term security." I gestured towards the vibrant flower beds. "She cultivated this garden with the same care and foresight she applied to our finances. She planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring, nurtured perennials that would return year after year, and planned for the inevitable cycles of growth and dormancy. She wanted our family's future to be just as well tended." Sarah nodded slowly. "We've been going over the trust documents, Arthur. It's a lot, but it's also clear Eleanor provided for us. She just structured it differently than we might have imagined." "She wanted to ensure stability," I reiterated. "She believed that true security came not from immediate access, but from a well-managed long-term foundation. She trusted me to be the one to uphold that foundation." I looked directly at David. "And I intend to. Not just for myself, but for you, for Sarah, and for any future generations. Eleanor's vision will guide me. We stood in silence for a moment, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead. The ghost of Eleanor's presence seemed to linger in the air, a spectral gardener overseeing her domain. It was a poignant reminder of the life she had lived, the love she had shared, and the legacy she had so carefully constructed. You know, David said, his voice softer now, Mom used to say you had a knack for fixing things, not just cars or leaky faucets. She meant fixing problems, finding solutions when no one else could. A faint smile touched my lips. She said that, did she? Yeah, he confirmed. She said you were quiet about it, but you always got things done, that you were the steady one, the one who wouldn't panic. It was a perspective I hadn't considered, a side of myself that Eleanor had clearly recognized and valued. Perhaps my quiet nature, my reserved demeanor, had been misinterpreted as passivity, but Eleanor had seen it for what it was, a source of strength, of resilience. She understood me, I said, the words filled with a deep, abiding love. Better than anyone. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the garden, I felt a shift. The tension hadn't vanished entirely, but a fragile bridge of understanding had begun to form between us. Eleanor's garden, a place of memory and beauty, had become a silent witness to the beginning of our reconciliation. The seeds of trust, planted by Eleanor's foresight, were finally beginning to take root. The crisp autumn air did little to dispel the lingering chill that had settled between David, Sarah, and me. The meeting with Mr. E. Henderson had provided clarity, but clarity, I was learning, didn't automatically equate to comfort. David, in particular, seemed to be navigating a complex emotional landscape. His initial disbelief had morphed into a grudging acceptance, but I sensed an undercurrent of resentment, a feeling that his own inheritance had been somehow diminished, or at least controlled by a father he perceived as less dynamic than himself. Eleanor, bless her foresight, had anticipated this. In the days following the funeral, as I began to delve deeper into the financial documents she had so meticulously organized, I discovered not just legal directives, but also personal notes, journals, and even a series of audio recordings she had made. These weren't meant for public consumption, but for my eyes and ears alone, a final private conversation between us. One evening, sitting in my study, the familiar scent of old books and Eleanor's faint perfume clinging to the air, I listened to one of her recordings. Her voice, though weakened by illness in its later stages, still held its characteristic warmth and clarity. "Arthur, my love," she began, her voice soft, filled with affection, "if you're listening to this, then I'm no longer there to hold your hand. And that thought pains me deeply. But I know you. I know your strength. You are capable of so much more than you often give yourself credit for." She paused, and I could almost picture her gentle smile. "David, he's so much like my father. Bright, ambitious, a force of nature. But he lacks patience. He sees the finish line before he's even begun the race. I worry he'll rush headlong into things, brilliant as he is, and miss the foundational work, the quiet, steady building that true success requires." Her voice grew more serious. "You, my darling Arthur, you have that patience. You have that quiet strength. You see the long game. That's why I've entrusted you with the primary stewardship of our legacy. It's not about control, my love. It's about preservation. It's about ensuring that the security we've built, the life we've created, isn't jeopardized by haste or impulsivity." She continued, her words weaving a tapestry of love, trust, and gentle instruction. She spoke of specific investment strategies, of companies she believed in, of diversification, and of the importance of reinvesting profits. She detailed her reasoning behind the structure of the trusts for David and Sarah, explaining her desire to provide them with security without fostering dependency. "Don't be afraid to let them see your strength, Arthur," she urged. "Don't let David's intensity intimidate you. You know more than you think. You have a wisdom that comes from observation, from careful consideration. Trust that. Trust yourself, and trust my judgment in trusting you." Listening to her, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, mingled with the ever-present sorrow. She had armed me, not just with assets, but with wisdom, with encouragement, with the assurance that I was capable. This was the true inheritance, not just the money, but the belief she had placed in me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I met with my own financial advisor, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, who had been managing my personal investments for years. I brought Eleanor's detailed records and Ms. Albright's expertise together, meticulously reviewing her portfolio. It was a complex, robust structure, a testament to her diligence and acumen. I also initiated more regular contact with David and Sarah. Instead of waiting for them to come to me, I reached out. I invited David to join me for lunch, ostensibly to discuss his startup's latest progress. "So, David," I began, as we sat across from each other at a quiet downtown bistro, the clatter of cutlery and hushed conversations providing a backdrop. "How is Innovate Solutions progressing?" He brightened immediately, the topic of his business clearly igniting his passion. "It's going well, Dad. We've secured a new round of seed funding, and we're looking to expand the development team. The market response has been incredible." "That's good to hear," I said, genuinely pleased. "Eleanor would have been thrilled. She always believed in supporting innovation." I paused, then added, "Speaking of which, her will outlines provisions for supporting family ventures. Once we've fully settled her estate, we can discuss how the David and Sarah Legacy Trust can best support your expansion plans." His eyes lit up. "Really? That would be amazing, Dad. We've been projecting our needs, and additional capital would accelerate our growth significantly." "I know," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. Eleanor knew too. She anticipated this. She believed in providing the resources for growth, but she also believed in structured, sustainable growth. "We'll need to see a detailed business plan, projections, milestones, the usual." He nodded eagerly, already deep in thought. "Of course, absolutely. I can have that ready for you within a week." Sarah, who had joined us for coffee after her own work meeting, chimed in, "And for my practice, Arthur, are there provisions in the Trust for Business Development there as well?" "Indeed," I confirmed, referring to a mental note I'd made after reviewing the documents. "The Trust allows for investment in professional development and practice expansion. We can discuss your needs as well." It wasn't about handing over control, but about fulfilling Eleanor's wishes, to provide security and opportunity guided by a steady hand. It was about managing the inherited burden, not just for myself, but for the future of our family. As I listened to David excitedly outline his company's trajectory, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Eleanor's faith in me and in my ability to manage her legacy was not misplaced. Perhaps with her guidance echoing in my mind, I could indeed be the steady hand she had envisioned. The initial hurdle of the will's disclosure had been cleared, replaced by a new set of dynamics. David and Sarah were now actively engaged in discussing their financial needs, albeit through the framework of the trusts Eleanor had established. This engagement, while positive, brought its own set of challenges. David, fueled by his ambition, and now aware of the potential financial backing, began pushing for immediate, significant distributions. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, approached the discussions with a more measured, strategic mindset, focusing on long-term security and responsible planning. I found myself mediating, not out of a desire to exert power, but to honor Eleanor's core principles: stability, prudence, and sustainable growth. Her journals had been invaluable, filled with her insights on financial management, risk assessment, and the importance of patience. She had written extensively about her philosophy: "True wealth isn't about how much you have, Arthur, but how well you manage what you have. It's about building a fortress, not a fleeting monument." One afternoon, David arrived at my house, a thick binder under his arm, his eyes gleaming with an almost feverish excitement. "Dad, I've got it all here. The revised expansion plan. We need the funding approved within the next 2 weeks if we're going to hit the Q1 targets. This is huge." I invited him in, offering him a cup of coffee. The familiar scent of Eleanor's favorite blend filled the air. "Slow down a moment, David," I said gently, gesturing for him to sit. "Let's take a look together." He practically slid the binder across the coffee table. "It's all in there: market analysis, projected ROI, team expansion, everything. We are talking about a significant capital injection, Dad, enough to put us leagues ahead of the competition." As I began to leaf through the meticulously prepared documents, I could see the sheer effort and intelligence that had gone into them. David was undeniably brilliant, a visionary in his field, but Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind. "He sees the finish line before he's even begun the race." "This is impressive, David," I acknowledged, my finger tracing a complex financial projection. "Truly impressive. But Eleanor's trust, it's designed for long-term security, not just rapid expansion. David's brow furrowed. But Dad, this is long-term security. The sooner we capture market share, the more secure our position will be. This investment will guarantee our success. Success is built on a solid foundation, David, I countered, recalling a specific passage from Eleanor's journal. She wrote about the importance of phased growth, of managing resources prudently, of avoiding the temptation of overextension. She believed in calculated risks, not gambles. I tapped a section detailing a rather ambitious marketing campaign. This projection here, it assumes a 30% market penetration within the first year. That's highly optimistic, even for a groundbreaking product. David's enthusiasm visibly deflated. Optimistic? Dad, the beta testing results were phenomenal. We have a product that will revolutionize the industry. I don't doubt the product's potential, I assured him, but Eleanor's trust requires a thorough risk assessment. We need to ensure that the capital is deployed effectively, with clear metrics for success at each stage. Perhaps we can approve a portion of the requested funding now, sufficient to cover the immediate expansion, and then revisit the larger sum once certain milestones are met. His face fell. A portion? Dad, that could set us back months. We'll lose momentum. Or, I suggested, it could ensure our long-term viability. Eleanor's plan wasn't just about providing funds, it was about instilling discipline. She wanted to see sustainable growth, not just a meteoric rise followed by a potential crash. Just then Sarah entered the room, carrying a file of her own. She had a meeting with me later that day to discuss her practice's expansion plans. She observed the tension between David and me, her expression carefully neutral. "Everything all right?" she asked calmly. "Just discussing the funding for Innovate Solutions," I replied. "David is eager to move forward with a significant expansion." Sarah glanced at David's binder. "That looks comprehensive, David. Have you factored in the contingency plans outlined in the trust provisions?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, this is about seizing an opportunity. Dad's talking about phased funding, which could slow us down." Sarah turned to me. "Arthur, David's passion is incredible, and his business acumen is undeniable, but Eleanor's directives were quite clear about responsible financial stewardship. Perhaps a phased approach, tied to specific measurable objectives, would align better with her intentions. It would also provide a stronger case for future investment rounds, should they be necessary." Her words, calm and logical, resonated with Eleanor's philosophy. She saw the wisdom in my approach, the alignment with her own principles. David, however, seemed frustrated by the unified front. "So, you're both ganging up on me?" he accused, his voice rising slightly. "No, David," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "We're adhering to Eleanor's wishes. She entrusted me with this responsibility, and I will not compromise her vision for the sake of expediency. This isn't just about your company. It's about the legacy Eleanor built, a legacy that provides security for all of us." The weight of expectation, both Eleanor's and my own, pressed down on me. I was no longer just Arthur Davies, astrophysicist and grieving husband. I was the steward of a significant estate, a role that demanded not only financial acumen, but also the fortitude to uphold difficult decisions, even when they clashed with the desires of my own son. It was a burden, yes, but one I carried with a quiet determination, Eleanor's voice a constant whisper of guidance in the back of my mind. The tension following my discussion with David about the funding for Innovate Solutions lingered, but it was beginning to be tempered by a nascent understanding. David, though initially frustrated, had grudgingly accepted the phased funding approach, recognizing the logic behind it, and perhaps sensing Sarah's quiet support for my decision. He had delivered the revised business plan, complete with measurable milestones, and I had approved the initial tranche of funding. It wasn't the immediate windfall he had hoped for, but it was a significant boost, and it came with the promise of further support as objectives were met. Sarah, meanwhile, was making steady progress with her own plans. Her legal practice, focused on family law, was thriving, and she saw the potential for expansion into corporate services, leveraging her sharp intellect and meticulous approach. We met regularly, poring over financial projections and market analyses for her practice. Unlike David's more volatile tech startup, Sarah's ambitions were grounded in a more predictable, established field. "Eleanor's trust offers a wonderful opportunity, Arthur," Sarah said during one of our meetings at her bright, modern office. "It allows me to invest in critical infrastructure, better legal research databases, hiring an associate, expanding our client intake capabilities, without taking on crippling debt. It's security, but it's also growth. That's precisely what Eleanor intended, I replied, feeling a sense of satisfaction in seeing her vision come to fruition. She believed in empowering her loved ones, but always with a focus on sustainable, responsible progress. We spent hours discussing her firm's strategic direction. I found myself drawing on my own experiences, not just in finance, but in managing complex projects, in assessing risks, and in understanding the importance of meticulous planning, skills honed during my scientific career and further refined by Eleanor's legacy. One evening, after a particularly productive session with Sarah, David called. His tone was different, less charged with the urgency of his business needs, more reflective. "Dad," he began, "I wanted to apologize for my attitude the other day. About the funding, I was taken aback but pleased. David, it's all right. I understand your passion for innovate solutions. It's remarkable." "No, it's not all right," he insisted. "You were right. Mom, she was always about the long game, wasn't she? I get so caught up in the next big leap, I forget about building a solid foundation. You reminded me of that. And Sarah, she's always been good at keeping me grounded." "Eleanor believed in structure, David," I said softly. "She knew that true success, lasting success, is built with patience and discipline. She trusted me to uphold that." "And you are," he said, a newfound respect in his voice. I see that now. It's just hard, you know, realizing that Mom saw things so differently, that she trusted you with all of this." "She trusted us all, David," I corrected gently. "She trusted me to manage the estate, yes, but she also trusted you to build something incredible, and Sarah to build a respected practice. She provided the means, but the drive, the vision, that comes from you both." There was a pause, a comfortable silence this time. "You know," David continued, "I was thinking about Mum's garden, the way she used to plan everything out months in advance. The companion planting, the crop rotation, I never really appreciated how much thought went into it." "She saw parallels everywhere," I said, a wistful smile touching my lips. "Life, business, gardening, they all require careful cultivation. Maybe," he mused, "maybe we could work on the garden together sometime, like a project, for Mom." The suggestion caught me by surprise, a warm wave washing over the lingering grief. It was an olive branch, a genuine desire to connect, to honor Eleanor's memory in a shared endeavor. "I think Eleanor would like that very much, David," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I think she'd like that very much indeed." We agreed to start the following weekend. As I hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The weight of Eleanor's inheritance was still significant, the responsibilities immense, but it was no longer just a burden. It was becoming a bridge connecting me to my past, to Eleanor's enduring wisdom, and most importantly, to a future with my son and daughter-in-law, built on a foundation of understanding, respect, and shared purpose. The seeds of reconciliation, nurtured by Eleanor's foresight, were finally beginning to bloom. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the invigorating scent of pine and damp earth as David, Sarah, and I gathered in Eleanor's garden. The vibrant hues of fall were beginning to fade, replaced by the muted tones of impending winter, but the underlying structure of her meticulous design remained evident. It was a landscape shaped by purpose, much like the financial estate she had entrusted to me. David, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic. He'd brought a small toolbox filled with gardening implements he'd clearly researched online. "Okay, Dad," he announced, a determined glint in his eye. "What's first on the agenda?" "Pruning the roses, clearing out the perennials." Sarah, ever practical, had a small notebook and pen, jotting down tasks as we discussed them. "We should focus on preparing the beds for winter," she suggested, adding compost, mulching, ensuring the soil is healthy for spring. It was a shared project born from a desire to honor Eleanor, but it was also becoming something more, a space for genuine connection. As we worked side by side, the familiar rhythm of shared labor began to dissolve the lingering awkwardness between us. We talked not just about gardening, but about life, about our hopes, our challenges. David spoke candidly about the pressures of running a startup, the constant need to innovate and adapt. He admitted that my cautious approach to funding, while initially frustrating, had forced him to refine his strategies and focus on sustainable growth, a lesson he was now applying to other aspects of his business. "Mum was right about me, Dad," he confessed, carefully pruning a stubborn branch from a rosebush. "I tend to get ahead of myself. Your guidance, it's helped me see the bigger picture, the long game." Sarah shared her aspirations for her law practice, her plans for mentoring young lawyers, and her desire to build a firm that not only provided excellent legal counsel, but also fostered a supportive and ethical work environment. She spoke of Eleanor's influence, how her mother-in-law's quiet strength and unwavering integrity had inspired her own professional path. "Eleanor built her life on a foundation of principle," Sarah said, her voice soft with admiration. "And she instilled that in all of us, in her own way. Whether it was managing a household budget or tending to a garden, it was always about care, foresight, and dedication." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, melancholic shadows across the garden, we stood back, surveying our work. The beds were tidied, the mulch laid, the roses pruned. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was progress. A tangible step forward, built on shared effort and a renewed understanding. "She would have loved this," I said, my voice thick with emotion, gesturing to the neatened beds. "She would have loved that we did it together," David added, a genuine smile gracing his features. In the weeks and months that followed, this sense of collaborative purpose continued to grow. David, guided by the structured funding and a more grounded approach, saw Innovate Solutions achieve significant milestones, leading to further investment rounds. Sarah's practice flourished, her reputation for diligence and integrity attracting a loyal client base. My role as trustee evolved. It wasn't about controlling assets, but about facilitating growth, providing guidance, and ensuring that Eleanor's legacy continued to serve its intended purpose, the long-term security and well-being of our family. I met regularly with David and Sarah, not as a stern arbiter, but as a supportive partner offering insights gleaned from Eleanor's journals, my own experience, and the wisdom of Ms. Albright. The initial conflict, born from misunderstanding and wounded pride, had gradually given way to a deeper connection. The story of Eleanor's will, which began with a son's harsh words at his mother's funeral, was unfolding into a narrative of reconciliation, resilience, and enduring love. Eleanor, even in her absence, had orchestrated a profound lesson in legacy, trust, and the quiet strength of a father's love. As I stood in the garden one crisp winter morning, watching the first snowflakes begin to fall, I felt a sense of profound gratitude. The ache of loss was still present, a dull reminder of Eleanor's physical absence, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was balanced by the quiet satisfaction of seeing her vision realized, of witnessing the growth and strength of the family she had so carefully nurtured. The future, once shrouded in the uncertainty of grief, now seemed bright, promising, and filled with the enduring echoes of Eleanor's wisdom and love. Our story, the one that began with an accusation, was now a testament to the enduring power of family, resilience, and the quiet, unwavering strength that Eleanor had always seen in me.